Hey, it's Sean Fennessy, one of the hosts of the Prestige TV podcast. HBO's Barry is back for a fourth and final season, and that means I'll be back recapping the show with co-creator and star Bill Hader to dive deep on the themes, scenes, and major moments in the series. Bill will provide insight into how every episode was made and why it's ending. New Prestige TV Barry recaps will go live every Sunday night when the episode ends, so make sure you're subscribed to the Prestige TV podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode is brought to you by Anytime Fitness. We may talk a whole lot about sports, but when it comes to keeping fit ourselves, there's definitely room for improvement. I hit this point early July. I was just like, I am not in good enough shape. I started trying to walk at least 15,000 steps a day or hiking or just anything to keep my legs moving. Now it's the end of 2023. I feel great. I had a physical 3 weeks ago, and the guy was like, "You're doing great. You're doing better than you were 3 years ago." I felt great. Whatever your goals are, progress is possible thanks to Anytime Fitness. Get a personalized plan and support from an expert coach anytime, anywhere. Visit anytimefitness.com to try Anytime Fitness for free. Start to train for your life. Terms, conditions, and restrictions apply. See website for details.
Welcome back to another episode of the Ringers NBA Draft Show. My name is Kevin O'Connor, and joining me, as always, is the Ringers J. Kyle Mann. What's going on, man? How you doing today?
Not too much, Kev. I'm up and feeling good, rearing to go, rearing to talk about some draft stuff. I know we're going to hit a lot of different topics because it's a busy time of the year. I know I say that every single time, but there's a lot going on here on all levels.
Absolutely. So we're recording this Tuesday afternoon, the morning after the Kings went up 2-0 on the Warriors. And so we're going to talk about some of the young guys that we're seeing league-wide right now throughout the postseason. Not a lot of them, Kyle, but in last night's game, Davion Mitchell, former Baylor player, champion, lottery pick, pivotal role against Stephen Curry. What did you see from Davion Mitchell as a small guard with the role that he played?
Ball pressure. That's what we saw. We saw that a little bit last year too in the playoffs. I think what this kind of throws me into, and I was somebody that was a little. I remember having the conversations with you and Sharks and Bill a little bit here and there that, you know, the four of us kind of were talking about that pick, that it kind of got out that maybe they were thinking about taking him, and then when they did. And I think Mitchell was projected in the top 10 throughout that season, if I'm not mistaken. Like, it's pretty consensus accepted, right, that he was going to go that high. Do you have a good memory for that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think he was projected lotto pick throughout the year. He kind of solidified himself. I mean, it was an unbelievable offensive season for him on top of his defense. Granted, the offense hasn't translated. I believe we talked about it on a show earlier this year. That looked like an outlier year for him as a shooter. He's still only 31.7% throughout his career. Granted, he did have the big three-pointer. That was a dagger last night.
Yeah. I mean, he basically has stayed on the floor. We know, and I guess it's a question of like, we're always having this conversation about whether or not short people have a reason to live, you know, to quote the famous Randy Newman song there. But I mean, like in the NBA, you know, they have plenty of reason to live, but do they have plenty of reason to be drafted or valued as NBA players? And I'm looking at just, you know, he played, almost 30 minutes last night and had 14 points. He went 5 for 10. As long as he could hit open shots, I mean, you need somebody out there, especially if you're playing the Warriors, you need somebody with a lot of stamina to chase him. You're going to have to throw multiple guys at him because, you're going to have to do some switching, as we know. You're going to have just people who can get low and get on the ball and bother ball handlers. I think in that sense, if he can hit open shots and provide that, you know, he's coming off of the bench. I guess the question is like whether or not a player that size can be like the focal point of a team. Who's the most successful? I mean, like Chris Paul, you know, Trae Young, I would say is probably 6 feet, you know, generously there.
Isaiah Thomas for a short while with the Celtics. Allen Iverson, you know.
Being the focal point, I guess, of an offense anymore. It's a lot harder. It's kind of like you're either, those guys are harder to come by, but I guess the question is kind of what separates them, right? If you're thinking about a Brunson, if you're thinking about a Chris Paul, What do you think? What would you say separates guys like that? And because those feel like rarities to me these days.
Strength being one of them. I think great strength, in addition to their great playmaking and feel, that can overcome their lack of size as offensive creators. I mean, Brunson might be, 6 feet, 6'1", whatever he, actually is, but he's strong on drives to the rim, has excellent feel for the game, good fluidity and footwork. As Chris Paul, he's called the point god for good reason, right? And I think with those types of players, that's what separates them from a Davion Mitchell, who totally different category of player. He's not running the offense for them at all by any means. He's more of a utility player, but we see the value in that in Mitchell, that even if he doesn't, even he's not meeting expectations. Like, let's just be clear. He's the 9th pick in the draft. You hope for a guy that you invest in at that point that they're able to be more of an offensive presence. But in certain matchups against Stephen Curry, I mean, like, there were so many possessions where, Steph gives up the ball and Mitchell's just sticking to him like glue off ball, fighting through screens, making things hard on Stephen Curry. Granted, on ball, sometimes the Kings were sending 2 towards Steph or shading a second guy towards him. It just felt like Davion Mitchell, though, more than anybody on that Kings defense, was responsible for, Steph needs to shoot more. Let's just make that clear. 20 and 21 shots in games 1 and 2. That he needs to be closer to 30, 35, in my opinion. They really need to feed Stephen Curry, regardless of who's defending him. But Mitchell is one of the reasons why those shots are harder to come by with the ball denial.
Yeah, and it's interesting. He seems like a pretty perceptive player defensively, like he's engaged and he's thinking. I mean, earlier in the season, I saw an interview where he was talking about guarding Steph. It may have been last season, but he was talking about the hard lessons that he learned from the level of focus and attention to detail. I know we saw that clip of JR talking about Dellavedova defending. And if you want somebody in your team that's going to be a nice sort of mentor for what it's like to guard Steph in this type of situation, Dellavedova is right there serving you on that front. But he made a comment that, and I'm not trying to make this more about Steph, but I mean, that's the reality, is that like when superstars are in the league, you have to think about them because that's what's there. That's what you have to build around. But I guess the question is, like, you mentioned like expectations year to year. I mean, I guess that changes. What's there dictates what our expectations really should be, because the talent isn't the same every single year. So, at the 9th pick, I'm just looking at some of these guys. I mean, I'm sure that if they could go back, do you think the Kings would have would they have taken a Trey Murphy? Would they have taken a Quentin Grimes, a Chris Duarte? I don't know. Do you think that there was another move there, just looking at that 2021 draft and this draft class in general? I feel like in these playoffs have been a little shaky, right? I mean, overall, this class, I don't know. Which question from that would you rather take? I asked you 2 questions, I guess.
Well, I think first, for the Kings, you look at the guys taken after him: Zaire Williams at 10. James Bouknight, 11, Josh Primo, 12, Chris Duarte, 13, Moses Moody, 14, Corey Kispert, 15, Alperen Şengün, 16, Trey Murphy, 17. I think that's probably the answer right there, Trey Murphy.
Mm-hmm.
Trey Murphy, a guy who's continued to exceed expectations for the Pelicans, is one of the better shooters in the league, a great at-rim, finisher, lob threat. And, solid defensively. He's not a stopper by any means, but he's solid. I think that'd be, of that next group of players who are realistically the guys you'd target, I think Trey Murphy at that point of the draft. But you're right, though, Kyle. I mean, Mitchell, in a very, specific role, is doing his job containing or making things tough on Steph Curry. You can't contain Steph Curry. I shouldn't say that. He's making things harder for him to generate offensive opportunities. Other than that, I mean, we're recording this before game 2 of Cavs-Knicks. Mobley might go for 50 tonight. I'm doubtful. But Mobley, we saw his struggles, on the boards. Julius Randle completely overpowering him. Some of his offensive limitations as well. Jonathan Kuminga, 7th pick in that 2021 class. A total 0 for the Warriors and their 2 games so far, which, when you get Jordan Poole struggling, You got Jonathan Kuminga struggling. You're not getting a lot of production from Dante DiVincenzo. It puts a lot of pressure, man, on Stephen Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green to be the sole sources of creation. And I think for the Warriors, this really speaks to just how much their decisions in the draft have been a whiff for them. And that's why they win the title last year. So it's weird to say that, but it was not because of their youth. It was because of the old regime, the old leaders, the former big three, not because of, a home run swing on young guys.
That whole thing is just interesting to me. And I think I've harped on this on the show before, is that it's just an odd shift for them to go from building the thing that turned into a dynasty and their thinking that went into those picks early on. If you think about what they did from 2009 to 2014, they picked a lot of guys that kind of forecasted. Well, they didn't forecast it because maybe they didn't know it was coming. Maybe they did. They knew what they had in Steph Curry, and they built a roster that had intuitive players around him that were smart and two-way players too. And then if you think about what they did in their two timeline approach, it was just totally different. They picked guys that weren't as high in feel. They were more physically imposing project kind of players, and the players that they passed up specifically in that draft, I think you never want to be in the, Wagner. Yeah, it's a huge one. He's a guy that would interface immediately with what they were trying to do. Can
you imagine if they had Franz Wagner right now instead of Jonathan Kuminga? My goodness, he would be one of the, he is one of the best young players in the Magic. But if he were on Golden State, teammates with Stephen Curry, I just can't imagine the amount of attention he would receive, how much of a name he would be understood as, even from casual fans with his talents as a two-way player.
Oh, my God. And you think about this is the basis that we criticize Franz on now is one where he's in a primary role. So we're just well, he's not quite efficient as a decision maker in the pick and roll at 6'10". Yeah. And then we're we're harder on him because he's on a younger team. But imagine if he were brought along in a lesser role where he was doing things that he was efficient at. Maybe he sprinkles a little bit he seasons a little pick and roll over your Golden State offensive casserole, but he's going to be cutting. And that's the thing I think that's really killing them. Like I said, not trying to turn this into a Warriors thing, but that's killing them. They're not getting the downhill pressure that the Kings are if you watch them on the other end. And I think intuitive kind of players, Kuminga couldn't stay on the floor, dude. I wrote down I think he only played 8 minutes total, and he packed that 8 minutes with just a tour de force of defensive mistakes. Kev. He was late rotating. He got burned off the dribble by Fox, which isn't a unique thing to have happen to you in the NBA. But he had weird closeout angles on Fox where he let him go left, let Fox get right in the lane. He didn't get over screens with Malik Monk. He had a really. It's brutal that for what they need that they can't get him on the floor because he can't keep up with the quality decision making that they need on defense in particular.
It's as if you mentioned the Warriors mindset and how they changed from guys with feel to more pure athletes. It's almost as if they felt our system can accommodate any player and we can make it work. So let's take the guy that we perceive as having the highest upside, the greatest raw skill, and we can turn that guy into something special. With James Wiseman at the number 2 pick, you can see right now the logic in taking Wiseman. I wouldn't have done it. I thought it was the wrong choice on draft night, but when he got drafted there, I was okay, the Warriors are drafting a big to combat all these great bigs that these up-and-coming teams are having. And you see the Kings, the way they're able to get into the lane, the way they're crashing the boards, creating second-chance opportunities. Boy, if James Wiseman had actually worked out, that's exactly what the Warriors could use right now in this series. So, I get the logic in some of the choices that they made, but at the same time, that was the risk in doing it, where now you're in this position where, they win the finals last year, and they have 2 home games coming up. They could tie this up. So you don't want to get too ahead of yourself. Mm-hmm. But we are entering a point where those mistakes after their one title coming back are starting to show why this could very well be the last dance for the Warriors. Could be.
It could be. And these teams that do extend their windows, that do have the opportunity to take one, it's rare that you get the opportunity to extend a window like this. And if you look at teams like the Spurs, the Bulls did a little bit there with that midway kind of hiccup that they had where they picked up Tony Kukoc. That was, a hell of a pick. But obviously, it just... If we want to expand it from the Warriors, like the thing that really stands out to me about the players in this draft that I think were undervalued is their defensive sort of mindset, is their defensive savviness. If you look at like Quentin Grimes jumped up, was undervalued. Herb Jones was undervalued. Miles McBride was undervalued. Even Trey Murphy, like we talked about, undervalued. Jalen Johnson, he's been kind of getting picked at. I mean, it's been a high bar. He had Jimmy Butler picking at him, and now he's got this really savvy Celtics team picking at him defensively. But he's a guy who is a really high feel player and is getting minutes for an Atlanta team in the playoffs. That one, have you been surprised by that, the Jalen Johnson thing?
I mean, it's nice to see Quinn Snyder incorporating him in a role that makes sense. I mean, I tend to think that, you see Kevin Huerter, thriving away from Trae Young. I think DeAndre Hunter will be better away from Trae Young. I think Jalen Johnson will be better away from Trae Young too, unless Trae ends up, playing the way that he should in a Quinn Snyder offense and motion. I mean, like, can you imagine if Trae Young wasn't such a ball hog and just let Kevin Huerter do some of the stuff that he's doing right now in Sacramento? If Atlanta had played in a motion system, which was their intent, by the way. I mean, like, I know when they drafted him publicly, they had said, oh yeah, I mean, we're not trying to build Warriors South here. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to build a system that involved motion and movement and ball sharing. And instead it became Rockets, east of Houston, with Atlanta, where it's like their own version of the ball dominant Rockets with all their high pick and roll with Trae Young. And I don't know. I think that you would still see Kevin Huerter in Atlanta today if they had built a system like that from the beginning. And with Jalen Johnson, it is cool to see him start to do some of the stuff. And his defense has been pretty good. He's arguably the best defender on the Hawks right now.
What is that even saying?
Well,
it's amazing.
That's a low bar, isn't it?
No, Deontay tries, and Okongwu is a quality defender too.
Well,
I
should say perimeter
right.
Okongwu is Capella. Those guys in their own ways from protectors, and Capella. I mean, Okongwu's versatility is is impressive as well. It's too bad the Hawks are just so overmatched by Boston because I like some of Atlanta's young players. I do.
It's odd how like one weird sort of like stylistic dissonance can disrupt. They just don't. If you listen to anybody who talks about the NBA or anybody, I mean, at any, like whether you do it for a living or you just love the NBA, you listen to any conversation that I have with just people in general is, man, I love Atlanta's talent. And then you look at it and you're just like, what's up here? Like, why is this? What's going on here? And you're right. And about like the way they built this team. And
is it Trae? Do you agree with me?
Yeah,
isn't him?
Well. Yeah, I mean, partly on offense, I think that you can't like go into following a template like the Warriors without the sort of like stylistic thing that implies, like a player at his size. Like, I mean, the thing about Steph is the on and off ball thing, the thing that Davion Mitchell, that De'Aaron Fox, that Dellavedova have all described is like the brilliance and the relentless motor of watching him go on to off, and Trae just doesn't do that. And I know you and I have even talked about on this show. About like, well, when's he going to do it? We keep waiting, and I just don't think he's that type of player. And it's probably just getting to the point where it's unrealistic to expect it, honestly.
Well, it's a shame.
It is. I wondered if I kind of like took the record needle and sat it on a groove, because I kind of just like put you in position to grab on Trae's play style. You just went to town. I loved that.
I mean, it is a shame, because you look at the actual top perimeter players in the league, and this is, I think, a lesson for any incoming draft prospects. I mean, Trae Young, just pulling up the Ringer rankings here, where do we have Trae Young right now? You guys have Trae 23rd, which is too high. You should not have him above Tyrese Halliburton. That's insane. But the guys above him, you got Donovan Mitchell, who can play on ball and off ball. Devin Booker thrives with and without the ball. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, you guys have ranked 10th. obviously dominant on the ball, but can also thrive off of a Josh Giddey and Jalen Williams and these other guys, Damian Lillard. Like I don't expect Trae Young to ever beat Stephen Curry. I don't expect anybody to be Stephen Curry. He's in a different stratosphere. But Dame is, I feel like, the player that, these guards can try to emulate. Being Steph is tough. But being Damian Lillard, he's at least active away from the ball. He doesn't become a non-threat when you take the ball out of his hands. And I think with this year's draft class, granted, there's maybe not a guy in that mold. I think, Keontae George-ish, but a lot of the guards are non-shooters in this year's class. Is there anybody that comes to mind that you could see as that kind of, on-ball, off-ball guy? Is it Nick Smith, who you really like a lot?
He's probably more hypothetical long-term project at this time. You're really kind of leaning on a lot of ifs. I like the Keontae thing. The non-shooting thing kind of implies that these guys are going to have different roles, and like they're not going to fit into that idea of like being the momentum building piece. The guy that can like come off of like a handoff or come off of a pin down or something like that, and the defense has to respect them so much uphill. I mean, Jordan Hawkins does some of that, but he has the other parts of it that he needs to work on, which is like the downhill finishing, the playmaking stuff. We haven't even gotten there yet. He just kind of exists as that like orbiting piece. No, I don't know that there's one that really. I mean, Colby Jones maybe someday. I could see him growing into, but he's not like a super fast off-ball mover either. But I think a big thing that we should look at too in today's NBA is just like, if you think about the length of the shot clock, defenses are so savvy now that like you can't just have guys that are like non-shooters, non-playmakers, non-drivers out there. Like you've got to be able to you have to be able to fill the shot clock with like good decision making. And we've seen that's why the Kings are so freaking hard to guard, man. If you watch them, like they're such an awesome team to watch because they'll run those teams out there. When you have Fox, and their vision of what Atlanta could have been if
Fox,
Trae had been
another guy better than Trae, De'Aaron Fox. You guys gonna move Trae down. I mean,
glad to.
Sorry, continue. Sorry, I had it.
I know it's cool. It's cool. No, I mean, if you just watch the flow of their offense, they're a good example. Like if you can orbit around a guy who's a great screen setter, a great passer, they have that three-headed ball handling monster of Fox and Monk, and then Herter, and and then you've got your compartmentalized ISO guy with like what Harrison Barnes can do here and there. I just think that's kind of the standard for today. Like you have to force teams to guard you for the whole clock, and I think that's what we have to be looking at in guards, honestly. And I don't know, but it is interesting that there aren't a lot of shooters like you were talking about among these guards. They are kind of more connectors. It's an interesting cluster of talent for that reason, I think.
How about with Wallace? I mean, he shoots the ball well statistically this year for Kentucky. Do you see that type of movement upside with Wallace as a shooter at all?
I don't think that he's like stationary or anything. I think he's shown that he can shoot a little bit off the dribble. We just didn't get to see him move within that offense with a lot of it. And we see this a lot with Kentucky guards coming out. Just the style of play doesn't really allow it to happen because they don't play 4 out, 5 out. I mean, he could. I don't know. Are you a believer in him as a shooter? I think the passing could get there. I think he has more in his bag as a passer than he even got to show at Kentucky.
I mean, he's such he has good feel, Case and Wallace does. And I think with him, defensively, check. Like, he's going to be great on that end of the floor, not even a concern. Spot up shooting, we'll see if that translates after his numbers did fall in the second half of the year. He's not a good free throw shooter. It's weird with him. I mean, I feel like he's got touch, but he might be one of those guys where the shot comes and goes. So I don't feel a lot of confidence there with him, which is the thing with this class. It's like, Grady Dick, Jordan Hawkins. These are some of the guys where you feel confidence in what their shooting ability will be at the next level. Jett Howard to an extent as well. But there's not a lot of guys in that first round right now where you're, feeling a high level of confidence that they're going to be an elite shooter, never mind at the top. Aside from Brandon Miller, Scoot, don't know. Amen and Osar Thompson, their whole story, through this year with the OTE has been about, well, how can they shoot? No confidence there. Anthony Black, no, not at all. Taylor Hendricks, maybe he's the guy where you do feel some confidence. He shot the heck out of it for UCF this year. 39%, on nearly 5 attempts per game. But there's not a lot of guys this year where you feel that way. By the way, Kyle, you mentioned Monk. How much joy does it give you to see Malik Monk just thriving for the Kings in the postseason right now as a Kentucky guy?
I predicted that the Monkassance was coming when he went to the Lakers.
I love it.
I thought it was coming when he went to the Lakers because I was like, him next to LeBron makes a lot of sense. I could just see him, this is the perfect canvas for him to paint. This is the perfect kitchen for him to cook.
It started there. It really did.
It had some momentum going, but I really think that this Kings setup he's just improved. I mean, like I pulled up some, if you want to talk about like what it takes, if you're that type of a scorer over the course since he is in his 6 seasons, he's gradually driven more per 100, which is a function of their offense. But he's also been more efficient, almost 1.2 points per possession. He is passing it more and drawing more fouls as a driver too, and I think that's been a huge part because he kind of came in as this like spindly shot creator, kind of a lather score, but I think the downhill thing has been really big for him. Like it's a deceptive part, and he's been murdering the Warriors with that in this series so far.
And the shot is finally beginning to click for him. I mean, you look at his first 3 seasons in the NBA playing for the Hornets, he's at 32.2% from 3. His last year with Charlotte, his 1 year with the Lakers, and now his 1 year with the Kings, he's at 38.1%. And I have not, I have no intel on how that happened. But I would imagine for some guys, it's a function of improving strength. You mentioned how he was so lean, and I think with him, maybe it's about that. Maybe it's about adjusting to the speed of the game. Would have to look in a little bit more closely there. But I think for, you watch the Kings and the Warriors right now, we're spending a lot of time on that game, but I think there's just so many fascinating players. Jordan Poole, this entire season, you look at his numbers on the surface and you're like, okay, yeah, he's pretty good. 20.4 points per game. He's not as efficient as last year, 33.6% from 3, 4.5 assists per game. But Warriors fans know watching him all 82 games. This guy over the course of the year has made mistake after mistake in clutch moments. He has taken unwarranted shots. His efficiency is down big time. He is a major liability on defense. And you're seeing right now in the postseason against the Kings, Steve Kerr is, he's throwing darts right now, trying to find guys that can work around Steph and Clay and Draymond. And Jordan Poole is not it. He's getting attacked on defense. He is not helpful on that end of the floor. He hurts your team. But for Poole, he's still only 23 years old. And you think about him long-term, still just now in the 4th season of his career. That Malik Monk trajectory for him is kind of possible to follow, where Monk becomes a better decision maker, a better playmaker, a more impactful defender. Poole puts up bigger raw numbers than Monk ever has, and yet I feel like the guy, he needs to be learning from Malik Monk with his journey. Like, how do you feel about that, Kyle?
I think that's fair. I mean, in terms of like just player types, it's pretty similar. I think the big thing for me is that like Monk's, I don't know if this is like a fair or like a smooth thing to do here, but like I just feel like personality wise, I can't put them in the same category.
So different. Way different.
Monk is just a really, I don't know. When you would watch him in college, you'd be like, well, this guy's just kind of messing around. Like, he doesn't feel like he's totally serious all the time. Like, he just had that sort of lightheartedness and flair and fun to his game. But he's actually a pretty focused and intense, like, competitor. Like, Monk is like a guy who, I don't know. I mean, I guess we can't act like Poole hasn't done anything in his career, but it kind of makes you start to think like, okay, well, was that like a one-off blip where he was playing around a lot more veterans and now he gets that big payday and he gets a little more focused in the offense and they're leaning on him more? Suddenly some of those warts start to show through a little more, And I just don't know. I can't put him and Monk in the same category, like as competitors, honestly. I don't know. Am I way off on that?
No, I think you're totally right on.
Yeah.
And, just another related thought to Monk there. I mentioned how he shot the ball poorly his first 3 seasons in the NBA. Jordan Poole, another guy with good touch, 88% from the free throw line, goes through these major hot streaks from behind the arc. but 33.9% in his entire career from 3-point range, struggling to shoot the ball right now in the postseason. He is somebody also where you on the surface, he's known as a shooter, but he's not proven yet that he can be a knockdown shooter, much like Trae Young as well, who has never shot, a great percentage from behind the arc. That's beside the point.
Any chance you can get. Huh?
I can't help myself today, Kyle. I can't. Before we get to the latest news, Austin Reeves with the Lakers goes from undrafted to a guy averaging 16.5 points per game since the deadline, 5 assists per game, low turnovers, great efficiency. I liked him in college. He would have been drafted in the 30s or 40s. I believe the Pistons it was that wanted him, but his agency said, no, we'd rather go undrafted. So that's why he goes undrafted. But for a guy as a second-round pick or undrafted player, there's no way. I could have seen Austin Reeves be this good this soon.
No, I mean, I'm sure there were people who they're just kind of in your camp. There's always this thing with the draft where you can play it safe and just be like, I'm not accusing you of this, but I'm saying I know we know how people talk around this stuff. There's this hedging to sort of protect your stance on a given player without committing. And I do this. I mean, I do this too, where you get queasiness about putting a number next to their name or saying like,
not at all. I mean, I do that every year. That's how mistakes happen.
Yeah.
I just looked it up. For what it's worth, I had him 39th on my board.
That's throwing. I don't think that's bad at all. That's pretty good, actually. I mean, So I don't think that this is what you did at all, but I think there is the thing too where just people will be like, I liked him. It's like, okay, you liked him. We don't really have any way of taking you to task about that. But
LeBron knew, he says, that he'd be this good.
Did he predict that? Did he say that he knew Reeves was going to turn into what he is now?
Yeah, he did. He said first practice.
Well, I said this on another show that it's that point guard thing, man. I mean, he went from being an on-ball player to, he was an off-ball player at Wichita State. He transfers to Oklahoma, becomes an on-ball player, demonstrates that he can do that. And you look at him and you think okay, you think 6'5" white guy, guy's probably like a knockdown 3-point shooter, but he really has more of a shit stirring, get in the middle, draw fouls kind of a game. He's very clever about how he he initiates contact. He just has a high threshold of quality decision making, and he competes well. So he's an interesting player, I think, in his journey. But I think it just comes up over and over again, man. It's the have you been a point guard in your past life on some level? Jalen Johnson, man, that's another guy on his AAU team. He played a lot of point guard, or on his EYBL team. That's something that I just really look for when I'm looking at players over and over again.
It's a great point, and I think that might be the thing to look at. And when I pulled up the scouting report, 39th. The one-line summary. Feels like I hit the nail on the head. Passionate player with a slippery shot creating style and a knack for coming up in the clutch. But it's with him, it's just hard to know. He shot 31% from 3 in college. I say in there for the negatives, tries to do too much at times, undersized as a wing, lacks lateral quickness, on defense. But all the positives that were there in college are still there in the NBA. I think sometimes with the draft, first of all, it is hard to project how guys are going to translate to the next level. It is tough. That's why teams make mistakes every year, despite having more intel than anybody on the planet. But sometimes I think it's the guys just are who they are a lot of the time. And Austin Reeves has one of those translatable styles. He makes me think about Malcolm Brogdon. What he was in college, and what he was in college is exactly what he is in the NBA, just a more advanced version that's developed. Same with Austin Reeves. He'll continue to, enhance his game to fit in with whatever system he's in. But a lot of the time, guys just are who they are. How often do you see someone just completely overhaul their game aside from a Pascal Siakam? That Siakam is the outlier compared to most players.
I don't even know if overhaul would be the word for him, though. Like we were talking about, that was like something that was just like a blank slate that just matured. It was a 0-1 situation. It wasn't a one. He didn't like, it wasn't like a macro evolution thing where one species became another. Like if you look at like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like the common denominator among the players I feel like that you're talking about are like pace dictators, guys that are like that have enough like high quality decision making and ball skills to pair with that. You can have the best mind in the world, but if you can't fucking dribble the ball, it's not going to matter. And if you look at like Brogdon was that way too, like in terms of he had that game where he dictated the way you played him. And I worry sometimes about guys that play really fast. If you wanted to nitpick Nick Smith for something, that could be it. He needs to slow down. And like, if anything, I think Nick could be falling into that Monk Poole kind of category where it's like, it might take some time. But Brandon Pajemski is a guy from Santa Clara that I feel like that is another player like that, like a lot of ball skills. Like he's played some on ball a lot. That's one to keep an eye on. But I was trying to think of another player that has that Reevesy kind of thing going on. Baylor Shireman, I don't know. He's coming back to Creighton this year, though. I don't know if there's another guy in that, like
Colby Jones.
Jones, yeah.
It's like maybe a little bit.
Yeah, he gives you some of that like second side creation, but I don't know about like
Jaquez.
It's hard to speed him up. It's the shooting thing that you and I have talked about a lot. It's like you watch him and he's playing at his own pace out there, and I still believe in Jaime. Are you still? Are you think he's a first rounder?
Yeah, I like Jaime. I mean, he's right on the bubble for first rounder. But those are the type of guys that we're talking about. We're like, oh yeah, good basketball player. He has all these great qualities. I'll take him 28, 38.
Yeah,
right. But those guys, like if you're doing a redraft of 2 years ago for Austin Reeves, he's a lottery pick at this current moment. He might get $100 million this offseason.
That's wild. That's wild.
Like those are the type of guys who stick around. And I mean, like, what about Andre Jackson? He officially declared for the draft. Different type of player. I mean, he's more of a disruptive defensive player, a connective piece on offense, more so than a primary. But he's one of those guys with that feel that you think translates to the NBA.
Yes, and I think but I'm trying to think of guys in the playoffs that like fit his mold, like in these playoffs. Who are the guys that are like non-shooters that are really getting significant minutes that aren't bigs? I don't know. Like even Giddey's taking like spot up threes, and we're assuming that like he could get to the point where he could evolve into that. But I can't think of a player type not that these playoffs are the end all be all, but they are a lens to think about it. Can you think of like a 6'7" non-shooter like him? I mean, Jalen Johnson might be a decent example, honestly. Of course, Johnson's bigger. He's probably more like 6'10", I think.
I mean, Okoro, again, recording this before game 2, he was not good at all in game 1. But Okoro is the type of guy that you could see the limitations of somebody who doesn't shoot the ball effectively. With the way in game 1 the Knicks were sagging off him with Quickly or Mitchell Robinson or whoever it was defending him, they're just not worried about him, and they're closing out hard and after helping inside and creating tough shooting opportunities for him. It doesn't like you need to shoot, like it's critically important in today's league. So you're right. I think it's rare to find guys that are non-shooters playing important roles for teams. Let's move on to Jaren Jackson Jr., another young guy for the Grizzlies. He wins Defensive Player of the Year. But what's been very impressive with him over the past month or so, pretty much ever since Ja went out for his suspension, has been his offensive uptick. I believe over the last month, almost exactly, he's averaging 25 points per game. If you move that back closer to the deadline, it's around 22, 23 points per game on pretty good efficiency. He's a guy we're talking about, young players coming into the league, evolving who they are. With Jaren Jackson Jr., you look at him at Michigan State, the defensive ability was clear as day. That's why he's a lottery pick. There's no doubt about what he could be on that end. Offensively, pulling up my scouting report from that year in the 2018 draft, you see glue guy skills, cuts well, runs the floor hard, finishes with either hand, shows flashes, finishing with power when he has space. Spaces the floor well. Odd shooting mechanics, but it works. Not a lot about self-creation. Predictable when asked to create. Handle gets too loose in traffic, and he tends to drive left. Average touch on post-ups and tough angle layups. Nothing really about his self-creation flashes because he didn't show that at Michigan State. But for the Grizzlies in this series against the Lakers, they're down 1-0. We'll see about Ja on Wednesday night in Game 2 against the Lakers. It seems like there's not a lot of optimism in him returning to the game. According to the latest reports today on Tuesday, he was seen at practice shooting shots with his left hand, not with his right hand at all. Jaren Jackson Jr., he's the DPOY. Congrats to him. But offensively, the Grizzlies might really need him to step up more than he ever has.
Yeah. And over the course, that's an interesting thing to think about, like what he was like in high school and at Michigan State and like projecting, for our purposes, like thinking about guys who haven't totally shown it a lot. I think he was really coming into his body. Like, he has a really, really interesting, unique body. As was said, his wingspan's crazy. His hands are huge. But I mean, the shot, I think we saw some of that. We knew he was going to be like a catch and shoot thing could happen for him. We've just seen him develop into, he has that body that has elasticity off the bounce. We saw him like slowly start to like take it off the dribble a little bit. He's like become a more confident driver more and more. I don't know. Like, I think we've got a long way to go for him to become like an offensive one, like for him to like develop like a dynamic enough game where teams are going to start pressuring him. And then you start talking about like, what kind of a passer can he become? I don't know if that's going to rescue Memphis in this series. I don't know. Are you a believer in that, or what do you think?
No, I think the Lakers, if Ja's out, this is going to be a quick series.
Yeah.
But Jackson's improvement is impressive nonetheless. And it does speak to sometimes, like we're talking about guys, they often are who they are. There was that raw little bit of skill that you can see that is beginning to translate. And I don't think he is quite where he will be at some point in his career. On the mismatch, Verno, I was asking him about, Ja was so passive in that game one at times, even before he got hurt. And he said, and this has been the case ever since he returned, Chris said he thinks Ja, seeing Jaren Jackson perform the way he did offensively while he was out, he's been trying to accommodate him more to let him continue to flourish in ways that he didn't prior, where Ja was more dominant with the ball and with his decisions. And so that seems to be that they're in an adjustment period now as Jackson is blossoming offensively with the increased on-ball opportunities that he was receiving. So that's going to be something to watch moving forward in this series. But we don't know with Ja Morant. That's going to be interesting there. Over the weekend, or rather on Monday, the NBA broke the ties for the draft lottery and the rest of the first round. The Rockets will have the number 2 odds over the Spurs. And to be clear, it just means now that the Rockets at worst can have the 6th pick. The Spurs could theoretically have the 7th pick, but still those teams, top 3, have equal odds. Between the other tiebreakers in the lottery, there's like slight percentage differences for teams moving up. The Pacers have the 7th odds. The Wizards have the 8th. The Bulls have the 11th odds. The Thunder have the 12th. And then outside the lottery, there were some ties broken as well. But right now, the lottery and draft odds are set. We're about a month away now from the draft lottery on May 16th. That'll be here before we know it, as will the start of the conference finals at that point. Kyle, you look at these teams with the bottom 5 odds. Every year since the Zion year with the draft, we've seen a team between 7 and 11 move up into the top 4. So we have yet to see a team 12, 13, or 14 move up. But I'm curious, of those bottom 5 teams, Dallas at 10, a team that tanked their way out of the play-in, got fined. They have the 10th best odds, a 13.9% chance of moving into the top 4. And then you get Chicago giving their pick to the Magic at 11. If that pick is outside the top 4, the Magic get it. So if it stays there, it's Orlando's choice. But if it moves into the top 4, the Bulls get it. And then you get 12, OKC, 13, Toronto, 14, New Orleans with their own pick. Of those bottom 5 teams, Dallas, Chicago, OKC, Toronto, New Orleans, is there a team you want to see move up into the top 4? Like, who would get you the most excited on draft night if their envelope doesn't get pulled up? Like who are you getting fired up about?
Is it a little shimmy you just did there, Kev?
I don't know. I mean, I get excited on draft night. I get fired up. Lotto night's fun.
Is the shimmy one of your? I'm curious. Are you much of a dancer in general? Are you like at weddings?
I'm not a dancer.
Okay.
No.
I was just curious.
You did that so naturally.
You did that so naturally. I didn't know if you kind of
maybe I got it in me. It just hasn't come out yet. I don't know.
A little Mark Madsen. That's before your time, shimmy. I mean, I think for you could categorize this into 2 groups because I feel like the 2 teams that are kind of wandering desperately here are these are teams that like have like now kind of. I mean, all 5 of these teams, if something shook one way or the other, their sort of stance and their like optimism could change, you know. And I know Dallas feels desperate right now, but they have an MVP level player and an all-star level player on their roster. It's like they're trying to win now. We know that. Despite the tanking, they're trying to make decisions in the short term that could help them win and not waste Luka's window. So I feel like Dallas and Chicago, both of those teams, I feel like if they moved up, depending, like going by just the age of their roster, I was curious to bounce this off of you. You know, the Chicago thing with the top 4 protected thing is interesting. I'm like, do you think either one of these teams would consider moving the pick, considering their short-term sort of aspirations and considering the talent kind of drop off? I feel like in that like 4 to maybe even 3 to 10, you know, it could flatten out based on what we've seen. We don't know. Do you think either one of those teams would move it? Because I feel like Chicago, I feel like they could maybe try to make some kind of a move for like a quality rim protector if they get into that space, like to move the pick to somebody that has a guy like that. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think if a team doesn't have the number 1 pick, there's a possibility that they could move down, out, you know, trade it for a player. So like Dallas and Chicago, that would apply to. For some of these other teams, maybe not as much. Like Toronto, you move up, you might want to get a Scoot Henderson, you might want to get a playmaking presence. OKC is the team, you know, with the 12th odds. If they were to move up, I'd be so fired up if that happened on lottery night. Like if you see the envelopes come out, New Orleans, Toronto, Orlando, it would mean like, oh my God, OKC, they make the play-in and they finish the year without tanking, and the basketball gods reward them. Who would make you most excited though, Kyle? Like who would get you fired up? Is it Dallas because of those implications?
I mean, I don't know if like fired up is the word, just because I mean you feel
you're stoic. You're unmoved by the moment.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, like, I don't know that it's exciting, like what Dallas is doing. It just feels like they have their claws on the edge of the cliff, and they're like, we need something to pull us up.
Well, that can make you excited. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily like, you know, a joyous occasion. It could be like, let's see what happens. That type of excited.
Well, we can kind of legislate my emotions some other time, but I like it. Would it make me happy for our friends that like the Mavs? Sure, it would. But in terms of just like a pure like, I mean, the Oklahoma City's like upside is just fun. Like I've liked the way they've built this roster. I feel like if they come back with Chet and then they add another piece, like I mean, I love young teams. That's always been kind of like I love watching young teams grow, and that's a lot of what I cover at The Ringer, honestly. It's just talking about whether or not those teams are going to ascend. And I think that would be really, that one to me, it just feels like they are ahead of schedule. And if they add the right piece, I feel like that's an easy answer. I feel like that's the most fun thing that could happen is if they get up there and they add the right piece and then they just keep rolling, you know, because they seem ready.
On Monday, Jonathan Givony of ESPN reported a bunch of new stuff that's going to apply to the 2024 draft. So starting next year, every prospect is going to be required to participate in the NBA draft combine, or they will be ineligible to be drafted until the draft in which they actually do fully attend and participate in the combine. And what participation means is they're going to have to submit to league medical examinations, share medical history, biomechanical and functional movement testing. They're going to have to participate in the strength and agility testing, so the shuttle run and all that, shooting drills, performance testing. Players are also going to have to do team interviews, the media circuits, player development sessions, They will not have to compete in the 5-on-5 scrimmage, though. And there's, stuff in here. We'll see how agents try to skirt around this. But, Gavoni wrote, players could be unable to participate because of a FIBA club, family tragedy, birth of a child, injury. They will still be required to complete those components at a later date ahead of the draft, or perhaps even after the draft. I wonder if that could apply, because medical records could still be shared in August or September or October for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be interesting to see the way this trade changes the draft process. But I know, talking to people around the NBA, they're like, thank goodness. They're long overdue, man, because of how agents would steer medical information and other information to some teams, but not to others. But now everybody's going to get it on an even playing field.
Yeah, it seems like the kind of class mindset of the NBA of like, it feels like a lot of this CBA has been like aimed at that, aiming sort of like rule tweaks towards the teams that are like spending a whole lot or like using their advantage of spending. Maybe they have more, they have more of an ability to do that. And, the idea of like just steering players away from markets, some of that is going to be tricky. But it's like, it is a good thing, I think. I think anything that sort of like spreads the wealth, is good, so that some of these markets aren't at such a disadvantage on that front. But I was wondering, the FIBA thing got my mind going. I was like, we're seeing more and more players kind of stretch their affiliation with countries and be like, oh yeah, they'll just join teams to be. I kind of wonder if we'll see that loophole. If we'll see like some guys be like, I'm gonna go play for the FIBA team. Oh, I'm injured, or just as a way to avoid it. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think teams or like agents are going to get really, really creative with how they avoid this stuff?
Probably, but it seems like a pretty harsh penalty. You're not eligible for the drafts.
A lot on the line.
There's a lot on the line there, man. It'll be very interesting. Well, that doesn't apply until the 2024 class, but that's 1 year away. Going to be very interesting to see the way that manifests over the coming year. Kyle, what do you have going on the rest of this week? I know you have a new podcast launching on Saturday.
Yeah, me and TP Tyler Parker are going to be doing some reacting to the playoffs. And that
TP.
Will be.
Is that you call them on the regular? Is that a normal thing?
Yeah,
just come out just now.
No, I say it every once in a while. I call him TP. I was going to say,
you ever do TPing houses back in your teen years or anything like that?
Oh, a couple times. I was a pretty good kid overall. How about you?
Yeah, I have.
Oh. I love whenever you get that intense look in your eyes and that big smile. I'm just like, what? what don't I know right now? Was this a frequent thing, Kev? Were you you a house egger or anything?
No, I would never egg a house. That's terrible.
Little rain, it's off of there. No big deal. No harm done.
That's true. No, I shouldn't say it's terrible. There's worse things you could do. Don't want to overuse the word terrible. TPing, I'm sure some people think that's terrible. But around Halloween time, maybe other times of the year too. I forget exactly, but my friends and I would go around doing that sometimes back in the day, the high school years.
We weren't huge pranksters, but we would one of our favorite things to do. This is terrible. I can't believe we did this. I had some friends that we would go through the drive-through. We would drive to Bardstown, which is a town not where we're from. So we wouldn't, it wouldn't be immediately that's Kyle. That's that. We wouldn't be ID'd just on site, but we would go through this drive-through, and the person working, when you're a teenager, you're not. I would never do this now, just because I'm not mean to service industry people.
I would never do this now, but I did it last Thursday.
No, I would never.
I've learned my lesson.
Service industry people, but they would ask us what we would want, and we'd be like, I wanna, and then we would blow an air horn into the intercom, which is a horrible thing to do. It's a horrible thing to do. But it was in that Jackass era. But that's not even I think we missed the branding on Jackass, because that's not what Jackass was. That was putting yourself on the line. This was more at someone else's expense. So not the coolest prank to play. I don't know. We did all kinds of shit like that. My buddies, they did crazy stuff after I even graduated and left. They would, I had a lot of friends in the grade below me, and they would they had a key to our high school. I think the statute of limitations is passed on this. I don't know if the powers that be knew this, but they would like sneak in and like our shop had like a go-kart in it, and they would like take the go-kart and ride it around the school like after in the middle of the night, and like they did some crazy stuff that I wasn't involved in, but I would always hear stories about it.
Things that I wasn't involved in. You were the one with the key.
I didn't have the key. I wasn't a part of it. I just would always hear about it. But yeah.
What were you like in high school, Kyle? Like, who were you? Were you a cool kid? Were you a nerdy musician? Like, who were you in high school? Were you friends with different groups?
Oh yeah, very much so. I was definitely I think playing sports, like, I played basketball all the way through school, and you were always going to be like cool crowd adjacent if you played sports, so I always knew those people, but I was definitely
you were a
nerd.
jock. You were pushing me into the lockers.
I was never a bully, but I was friends with everybody. The music thing kind of pulled me. So I was like, at one point I was like a captain on our like basketball team, and I was the president of the band. So I was all over the place. But I was in drama and stuff too.
President of the band?
Of our band, yeah. I mean, if you were a senior, you could be band president. It wasn't that big a deal. But
you were cool, Kyle.
I was rounded, I would say. I think that's a positive though. I think at public school, I think you get some of that like social limberness. It's good for you, I think. I hope my son gets to do that.
Jesse Lopez says in our Zoom chat, king of the nerds and the jocks.
I mean, you can see some of that in the stuff I make. I mean, some of the just like hopelessly nerdy shit that I unearth when we're talking about basketball. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't do it any other way, man. I enjoy it. How about you? Were you were bullied? Was that the vibe I got there?
Well, but freshman football year, I definitely was, for sure. I remember getting held up to the locker once my freshman year by this kid, and like it was like
his name. You wanted to say it.
I know his name, and I won't say it. But I remember he held me up to the locker, and I just started laughing. And it was like this thing out of a movie. I couldn't believe I was in that moment. I just started laughing, and he had the most perplexed look on his face as he did it.
You were just laughing at the clichéness of it?
It was comical to me that this buffoon was doing that. And still to this day. What, does it not surprise you that that's how I would react?
I don't picture you. I didn't picture you as a fighter. I just pictured you as I'm not. I don't know, the things that you're unbothered by. Sometimes
I've never been in a fight.
Kevin is his own bird.
I've never been in a fight in my life. The closest I've been was in high school, and like one of my friends wanted to fight. Like it was this whole thing. He threw a chair and all that, and he came over wanting to fight me, and I said, "Dude, stop. We're friends. Like stop." And I diffused it, and nothing happened. I've never been in a fight, and I would prefer never to be in a fight. I don't see the point.
I think I've thrown like one punch in my life.
You knock him out. You make the best of it.
No, it was just sort of a glancing blow. I was always kind of
like an NBA fight, just
sort of. Yeah. I got hit in the face a few times in basketball. Wow. But I mean, like I was always the like kind of chirp to the precipice of disaster and then like diffuse. Like I was pretty good at that. I don't know. I definitely a lot of like tense conversations that like you get to the edge of it and you're like, okay, back off now. And you get good at that. I think if you're a talker, I was getting under people's skin. I used to do this thing in varsity practice where, I was telling one of my friends the other day, I was like, it's amazing I didn't get punched. Is that like, I would just basically make some comment on their closeout or something like that. I'd be like, gonna have to do better than that. Like things, I would say,
you're chomping your feet too much, bitch.
I'd be like, you better get out. You better get your hand up. And I remember one time this dude who was a big muscle bound upperclassman on our team, he goes, "What the fuck did you say?" Like screamed at me. And like, I was like, okay, I better stop doing this because he could have just squished me and broke me in half.
For criticizing his closeout technique?
I was talking shit. Or I would say people's name after I hit a three over them. I did a lot of stuff, Kevin. I was a chirper. Yeah,
I'm still a chirper to this day on Xbox, playing Call of Duty Warzone. But that's another story for another day. You can watch my Twitch stream if you want to see me talk trash, which I have not streamed in a bit, but I'll be back again soon.
Busy time. No time for that stuff.
Yeah,
right?
no time for that right now. It's playoff basketball time. It's draft season, and we'll be back again next Wednesday, Kyle, talking more drafts, more playoff, young guy talk, and whatever else comes up, including your high school bully days.
I never know what we're going to talk about at the end of the show. I basically incriminated my good friends on this show, which was a long time ago. Told stories that made me look like a jerk.
You weren't a jerk. No, nothing wrong with trash talk. I love trash talk. It's part of competition.
I do too. I still do it. I'm acting like I'm like reformed. I'm not. I still do it, but no fights. No fights though.
Yeah, no fighting. Diffuse those. Well, Kyle, hope you have a good rest of your week, man.
You too. Good to see you, man.
Thank you so much to Jesse Lopez for producing today's episode of the Ringers NBA Draft Show. Please do us a favor, subscribe to the Ringers NBA Draft Show wherever you get your podcasts. It really does help us out. Hope you have a good rest of your week. Enjoy the playoffs.